Hey guys, my name's Schaun and I work at Aampe. At Aampe, we automatically tailor push notifications, both the content and the timing, to allow apps to actively engage with their users at scale. Now, you can find out more about what we do in general at the website, the URL you see on the screen, amp.com. That's two A's, mpe.com. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is our algorithms. We use a lot of different analytic approaches to do what we do, and I designed most of those approaches. That's why I'm doing this. And we naturally get a lot of questions about what we do and how we do it. It's easy to talk to data scientists about that. Usually we have a common vocabulary. We kind of all know where we're all coming from. It's easy to explain. But when I talk to people from other backgrounds, it gets harder. They need to understand it too. So when you're not necessarily a data scientist, but you want to use a data-centric tool, you need to know whether to trust it, how to use it. You need to know if there are certain situations where it's going to be harder to use than others. All of that requires you to understand to some extent how the system works, even if you don't understand it at the code or math level. And it's important to me that people understand how our systems work. It's frustrating to me personally when I'm told I just need to take someone's word for something. Like if I go into the mechanic, I need to get my oil changed, and then they're like, oh, something's broken, you need to get it fixed. If that's something that's broken is like the brakes, then I understand cars well enough that I can imagine what's going to happen if I don't fix the thing. But in other cases, I just don't understand the car well enough to know how serious the problem is, what I need to do about it, how quickly I need to act on the information they're giving me. I don't need to understand the whole system. I don't need this mechanic to sit here and lecture me on like the car's electrical system or how internal combustion engines work. I just need someone to explain enough to me that I can make a good decision. And that's what I want to do with Aampe's systems, and what I have struggled to do as we've built out the system and tried to explain it to everyone. So I thought about it, I worked on it, and in the end, I did the only thing I felt I could reasonably do. I wrote a children's book. I didn't mean to write a children's book. When I started this, I was really just trying to write down some simple explanations of what our core systems were. And every time I'd write it, I'd think, it's not simple enough. It's not clear enough. So I'd keep clarifying it and I'd keep making it simpler. And pretty soon I had an orange dot that was talking, and it just kind of grew from there. So I went with it. And I'm kind of pleased with the outcome. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to read through the entire book right now. If you want to read it, you can find it on our website. Of course, most actual children would not be interested in optimizing push notifications. I understand that. But the book really is very similar to what you'd see in a children's book. It's 40 pages long, technically 45, but 5 of those are actually just section headers, so I'm not counting those. And that's the same length as Maurice Sandek's Where the Wild Things Are. It's the same length as Laurie Keller's Arnie the Donut, which is my personal favorite children's book. It is concise. Most of the pages have fewer words than the first 2 verses of YMCA by the Village People. No page has more words than the first 2 verses of YMCA plus the chorus. So in most cases, pictures make up at least 20% of the page, sometimes over 80%. And the pictures aren't just there for illustration. In many cases, what I've tried to do is visually explain a concept instead of trying to explain it in words. So all of that is a long way of saying it may still look like, oh, wow, this is a lot of stuff to read about a technical system. It really is very simple. We've tried to make it very straightforward and a little bit fun to be able to read through it and learn about what we do. Like I said, I'm not going to read the whole book today. You can find it on our website and read it through yourself. Today, and in a series of 4 other videos, I'm going to walk through sections of the book and talk about our systems from the perspective of not only the person who wrote this particular presentation, but also the person who created many of those systems. So, I already said that, but I guess it's worth reiterating. We do some hard things, like some of the stuff we do is pretty complicated, but it shouldn't be complicated to understand why those things are a good idea. And that's what I've tried to get at with this. So we're going to start with the problem. What is the problem we're trying to solve? Also a little bit about how we've seen other people try to solve that problem and why we don't think the other solutions work as well as we often hope they will. So this is a user. This is any of your users, and any of your users are really interesting people. They have hopes and ambitions and goals and personalities. They have context and backgrounds, and that makes them different from all of your other users, and you will never know most of those differences. You meet your users through your platform, through your app, and that gives you a very limited view into those users. So you only see what they do on the app, you only see them when they are using the app, and you only see them submerged among all of those other users. So even if your app did afford you a way of getting to know a person the way you would get to know a friend or a colleague or anyone else that you met face to face, you wouldn't be able to because there's so many of them. You can't do that kind of social relationship building at scale. There's just too many people. So what we end up with is a whole bunch of users that we really want to understand as the owners and managers of these apps. We want to get to know them because we want to be able to give them what they're looking for. But you can't see that. You don't get that information, and even if you do, it's too hard to find it at the individual level. So the way most companies try to deal with this is through segments. So a segment is really just a label. We take a bunch of people, we decide through various means and methods that they are similar, at least similar enough to treat them the same. And then we do treat them the same. So when we write a message for a segment, and then we send it to everyone in the segment. When we want to see how people responded and see whether it worked, we look at the whole segment. We aggregate it up and say, all right, how did the segment perform versus other segments? That's a really clumsy way of trying to get to users. You are necessarily required to have a small number of segments. If you have too many, then you might as well just try to interact with everyone individually in the first place, and as we already established, that's just not really feasible. But as soon as you get just a few segments, you end up actually covering up more than you reveal. You end up having these labels that you're treating everyone the same, even though there's tons of interesting and often important differences in there. The way I often think about it is to think about it this way. If you had a choice between knowing a person's hometown and knowing a person's street address, it would be better to know the person's street address. Because the hometown, yes, that gives you some interesting information. You know what region they're in, maybe you know some things about that town. You can get maybe some aggregated information on the town in general. There's stuff you can do with that information. But if you know their address, you know all kinds of more specific information that's more relevant to them specifically, that gives you more of a basis for interacting with them well. And you know their hometown too. So if you have the more granular information, you have lots of new stuff that the larger box doesn't give you, but you get the box too. So what we have tried to do is think about, all right, for a location situation, getting latitude and longitude, like that kind of gives you that home address granularity, and then you can find out things that happen near it. and work with that data. But when you're dealing with behavior instead of geography, it becomes more complicated. In the case of geography, you have two dimensions. You have latitude, longitude. If you want to get fancy, you have altitude. But you have a limited number of scales you have to work with in order to characterize where a user is. But with behavior, you might have 3 dimensions, you might have 5, you might have 15, you might have 152. There's lots of different ways a user's behavior can vary. Just think of every single way they can interact with your app. Each of those is potentially a different dimension. Anything we can measure is part of trying to locate their behavior, which means it's a more difficult thing to do than putting a pin into a map. So that is all I'm going to talk about right now. That's the problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to locate people's behavior, but a segment doesn't really do that. It sort of pretends that it does, but in reality, it ends up masking a lot more information than it imparts. We created Aampe because you should be able to get that detailed information about your users. You can do better than segments. That's what all of our systems allow you to do. And I'm going to talk about more of all of those specifics in the next videos. So this was part 1, just talking about the problem. Part 2, we're going to talk about the user landscape. That's our representation of behavior location. It allows us to structure push notifications, both the content and the timing, to set you up to listen to your users at scale and reach conclusions about what they like and what they don't like. The video after that, I'm going to talk about the rewards menu. That's how we tie together the user landscape and the push notifications you send with all of the ways that your users can provide value to you. So the user landscape sets you up to learn, but the rewards menu allows you to provide information about that will actually teach the system what works and what doesn't. The actual learning takes place in part 4, which I will talk about in another video, which is the what-if model. That's where we look at all of the possibilities about how users can react to different kinds of messages. The model works only because we already set up the user landscape and the rewards menu. But the model allows us to create fully personalized scores. It tells you the best ways to communicate with each of your users, and it allows you to send that communication constantly, automatically at scale. You start it running, and it will be able to continue to communicate with your users with minimal involvement from you. The 5th video, I will wrap this all up by talking about why we've gone to all the trouble to personalize push notifications, why we think that's worth it. So yeah, that's all for right now. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next video.